Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. I can't wait to share this conversation with you. It's with my guest, Helen Vonderheide, and earlier today I was thinking about how I want to introduce this conversation. And here's where I'm landing at this moment. So, something I never really talked about is how I set up the energetic space for the conversations that I have and that I record for this podcast. What I do is I set an intention to create a cozy and welcoming space for my guests. And usually what that looks like is in my imagination, I create this living room within a house. And within that living room, there's this beautiful fireplace. There are some yummy snacks and there's some tea. And I relax within that space and I welcome in my guest. And whatever energy they're bringing in, whatever thoughts or contemplations or questions they're bringing in, I welcome all of it. And what I do is I really see my role as a host as this amplifier of whatever it is that they're bringing in, right? So I never really know what the conversation's going to be like. Sometimes the conversation is very fiery, sparks fly during that conversation, or other times it's very mentally stimulating, other times it's very heart-led and maybe even feels very much like this deep conversation between friends. And then other times I enter into a portal with my guest and it almost seems like time just stops. We enter into this timeless space where consciousness is just flowing. And at the same time, it should be no surprise that in these moments, one also feels deeply embodied. And so this was my experience having this conversation with Helen. It really feels like it was so timely and yet so timeless. It felt so embodied yet also very cosmic and Akashic. And this to me is a beautiful amplification of the way that Helen moves through time and space in her life and in her work. And I have had the privilege of experiencing and getting to know Helen's work in the past couple of years. And yeah, I've just really loved and admired and been so inspired by the way that she holds space for others and their exploration. And yeah, we talk about that and about so much more within this conversation. So I just kind of want to let you experience the conversation for yourself. But before I do that, let me share Helen's bio. Helen Vonderheide is a community educator whose teachings invite the expression and embodiment of interconnectedness, relationality, and reciprocity through the lens of the Akashic Records, decoloniality, and empirical evidence. All right, without further ado, this is my conversation with Helen Vonderheide. Welcome to the podcast, Helen. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to talk with you.
Jonathan, I am so excited. I feel like a kid in a candy shop.
Me too. Totally. I just have always loved having space to share heart connections and thoughts with you and reflections, I have found you to be a person and a teacher who just so deeply listens to what is wanting to come through you. And I think it's just so inspiring to me, Helen. So I'm really excited to see what we're going to talk about. And I want to preface this by saying that it's always cute for me to notice when is the right time, that I'm feeling kind of this internal push to have and to record a conversation with someone. And something that maybe listeners may or may not know is I've been engaging with your work for almost 2 years now. Isn't that wild?
Yes.
And I have even studied with some of your students, some of your past students. And so this feels like kind of a full circle moment, and your work has just really shifted so much of my own practice. It's actually like, I don't think I can talk about it in 5 minutes succinctly. So let's just get to it.
Mm. I'm excited too.
Mm-hmm. I like to begin actually in the present moment. I'm curious to hear who you sense, know, or feel yourself to be in this moment.
Mm. In this moment, I've actually been starting to feel more and more like myself,
Mm.
which is still the question, like, who do I know myself to be? But what comes to mind is over the last several months, I've felt this pull away from me, away from my body.
Mm.
And I'm going to share what I mean by that. Um, Leading up to this moment, last year was my first year in living systems, the decolonial program. And I'd really discovered this like unearthing that was happening inside of me, an unearthing that was showing me things about myself that were so buried and unconscious. And quite honestly, I don't even know if those things would have been unearthed if it wasn't for living systems. And I did start to feel myself dissolve. And that was really difficult because I was like, how do I hold myself when I'm dissolving?
Mm-hmm.
So that was last year. And then this year, my partner and I started to make some choices around co creating our lives together. So I moved in with him and we talked about potentially creating a family,
Mm.
buying a second house in Baltimore. And all of those possibilities frightened me and started to create a form of self abandonment. So, over the last year, I've experienced really painful sensations of being in a physical body, almost as if I could feel and even want these things with my partner, but something inside of me being very resistant to it.
Mm.
So it was easier for me to self abandon myself.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I've just experienced so many body things in this last year because facing the possibilities of what that expansion looks like in my partnership were just frankly something I was not equipped to move through.
Mm.
So this last month, was really difficult. Um, Really, really difficult to be in my body because some of my local conditions of living in Baltimore City have gotten to the point where it's been pretty close to life threatening to like live, here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm safe and my life has not been threatened. But when it comes so close to you, you have a difficult time discerning if that is for you or if that's just around you or what's your place in all of that.
Yeah.
So that had created these really painful flare ups inside of my body where I was so debilitated that I couldn't even lift up my left leg. I had to use my hands to like lift my left leg. And so
Mm.
I was like, oh my goodness, I am becoming handicapped. Like, this is a new experience for me. And like, what's really going on? So I decided to, and with the support of like some people who I will turn to help me see things that I'm not, I decided to first change my diet. And I started to go back to an anti-inflammatory diet.
Mm.
And just that diet alone, I was eating gluten free and now I'm like grain free, sugar free.
Mm-hmm.
So just my diet alone, Jonathan, has helped me find myself again. Like it's helped
Mm-hmm.
me find who I am in this body. And what's so beautiful about, not eating grains or sugar is that you really have to be mindful of like the hidden sugars. And so what you're really eating is like whole foods. And I've been eating these whole foods and I just think like, oh my God, is it just whole foods that can like be so healing? But
Mm.
like truly food has been healing me over this last month. Like I've felt so good and I've like felt so in my body. So this really beautiful question of like, just like who do I know myself in this moment to be? It's like all I can say is that I just feel more myself. Like I'm just more in touch with more of myself.
Mm.
And the last thing that I'll say is the only reason I can sense that or know that is because there has been so much inflammation, whether it's been physical or emotional or energetic, even, I'm thinking just like mentally, like there's been so much inflammation inside that reducing it has just allowed me to connect with like a part of myself that just feels like home. Like I feel like I'm
Mm.
like back home in my body.
Wow. Wow. I just absolutely love everything you're sharing here, Helen. And thank you for sharing that with us. It's so interesting because what I want to share with you in this moment is I've been returning to some ancestral practices. So my parents are Chinese descent people who have settled in Indonesia. And so I know that one of my ancestral practices is Qigong. And I've been returning to that. And for a while, I didn't find the teacher that felt right to me. A lot of Qigong teachers feel very like bro-ish to me. And I was not attracted to that energy. But recently I found an incredible teacher. And what has been interesting, Helen, about returning to the body has been that as you were sharing, it actually showed me the places where I have abandoned myself physically and abandoned my own needs and abandoned my own knowing about my body, which is so outside the range of my focused consciousness, And I think this is maybe something that maybe I'm making an assumption here, but my perception is that this is an interesting path for both of us, because we're the kinds of people who are really in touch with that unseen realm, with more of that spirit dimension, consciousness. And it's almost like as we recommit to being in the body and walking the path that is here for us, it's almost like, okay, you said you're ready. Now look at your body. Has that been your experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, very much so.
Uh-huh.
And I just, I practiced Qigong, and
Mm.
it was so incredible. It was when I was in Los Angeles, with one of my like dearest friends and former students. Her name is Kit. She's also a traditional Chinese medicine acupuncturist.
Mhm.
And I know she's certified in California, but I think she took the test to like be certified nationally or be licensed nationally. And Kit had been my instructor for during the pandemic for like quite a few months. And
Mm.
there is something so extraordinary about that work because of the inner heat that is not only so necessary to be rooted and grounded in the body, but to also allow that inner heat to be interconnected with you and with that environment.
Yeah.
And even just I'm thinking of people that you sort of interact with. And so I can't really think of a more embodied practice like that.
Mhm.
Truly, I mean, that's really the origin of everything, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
That feels like the origin of any body work, any embodiment work.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate how with the right teacher, it really is about creating. Actually, it's not creating. I think it's recovering and reclaiming
Mm,
the connection between consciousness and the body, right? And then this kind of tertiary layer, at least in how I perceive it, of like more of our emotional or energetic body, right? It's like, how do all three dance together, in this nice
mm.
little triad? So, um, yeah, I'm curious to hear how your relationship with the work that you've been doing with the Akashic Records play into this body exploration.
Yeah, great. Oh my goodness. Such a great question. There's a few things that are coming to mind. I think the most important thing, and this is what I have seen over the last 9 years of me working with the Akashic Records,
Mm-hmm.
and and Jonathan, you and I have talked about it. Calling it the Akashic Records just doesn't feel like the appropriate term, but it's the term that we most know, I would say, socially at this time.
Yeah.
But I know that the language is evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just call it the Akashic Records for now. But one of the biggest, it's a discrepancy that I've seen. And when we're working with the Akasha, we we're in touch with this expansive potential. It may be um, not physically tangible or embodied yet, and it also may be, but it's so expansive. It's like you can you can experience a vision of what is possible for you, you know,
Mm.
and not just one thing, but so many things. So you've like got this like incredible insight, and you're like, oh my God, I want to experience that on earth. I often think about like this very like experiencing like heaven on earth, you know? It's like, how do we experience heaven on earth?
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like, how do we bring this um formless like vision into physical form?
Yes.
And the discrepancy I've seen is that sometimes we can fall, like we work toward that, but we fall a little short. And so a lot of my research in the records, like over the last few years, has been like, well, what is this discrepancy? Like, why are we falling short? Why can't we, why do sometimes the timelines not fully line up? Or um if that thing doesn't come to fruition, why did that not? Why perhaps did it look a little bit different?
Mm.
So what I've found, and this is kind of like where my research is headed with the Akasha as of late, what I've found is that, oh my goodness, it's so many reasons, but you know, a really big percentage that is connected to that discrepancy is what we inherit through our genetic expression, you know, through our ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And of what we inherit, if that has not been fully processed, or there's some kind of a misunderstanding, or maybe like a lack of like the full story of whatever that trauma um or I would say even just like that hurt has been, then it creates this pattern that, unbeknownst to us, we are living out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one part of it. You know, and then of course we also have our own present life hurts, where those also, you know, create these impressions in the field that are patterns that we're living out. And it's not that that expansive potential isn't meant to be fully experienced in your body. It's just that there's almost like a piece of the story that's missing. And when
Mm-hmm.
we can get that piece of the story, which to me just feels like a deeper understanding and wisdom, you know, it's just like kind of seeing the other side of things. And so when we get that and we integrate that understanding, whatever those hurts have been, they start to resolve. It's almost like they're like impressions that are repaired in the field. And somebody starts to experience more and more of their wholeness. And as they are feeling more embodied, it's easier for that expansive potential to be held in the physical body, because it's almost like when there's some kind of dysregulation, our body just it can't hold it. There's literally no space in the body to hold it. And so um so that's been some of the research as of late. And I decided to pursue the somatic experiencing nervous system regulation work, because what I have found, you know, in addition, like, so if our hearts are holding on to the hurt or the stories, you know, the, let's just say the untrue stories, then those stories are communicating with our brain and with our nervous system. And so our nervous system kind of feels like the second system inside of the body that is operating and running the show. You know, it's like, yeah, our
Yes.
thoughts and you know what, our neural pathways, but you know, if the nervous system can't hold it, then we can't embody it. Like we can't experience it
Mhm.
physically.
Mhm.
So let me know if you have any thoughts about what I shared, but that's kind of where I've been, like, and I feel like such a like researcher, I'm like always like trying to figure it just feels like a puzzle, like I'm trying to figure out.
Mhm. Mhm. That really struck me, Helen, because that's also where I've been in the past couple years, I would say. And this connection, I think, between consciousness, energy, and the body have been so interesting to me. And as you know, my background is I trained as a musician. And so I feel like the language of music is always the way I can understand things best.
Mm.
And the way I've been thinking about this is that for many of us, we're like musical instruments who are able to perceive these songs, right? That like exist in the ether. And we want to play the songs. But our instruments themselves, right, have traveled and maybe we lost a string along the way. We forgot the tuning that is actually in alignment with us. And so a lot of the process has been around what does it look like to retune this cosmic instrument that is our bodies, that is
Mm.
our heart and our emotional dimension and our mental state and literally like the strength of our physical bodies, right? Because if my guitar is missing a string, Helen, or is not tuned properly, it can't play that piece. No matter how amazing my technique is, right? No matter how beautiful the song is, it can't come through. It can't be expressed through that instrument. So I think there is and this is something that I've slowly come to because as you know, I am an astrologer. I work with astrology. And what I have often found in both doing astrology readings as well as Akashic readings is the first reading blew people away. People are like, whoa, this is incredible. I felt so affirmed. I see all these potentials. But then how do we integrate it? And I came to this point, Helen, and especially through teaching, because I think teaching is and has been the most confronting thing for me because we get to be with our students or the people in our community for a much longer period of time. And the attention and the intention and the pressure is not as focused and not as concentrated as doing one-on-one work, right? When we're doing one-on-one work, we can really kind of custom tailor what we're sharing with this person, helping them really get to the heart of it. When you're in a student community, the holding towards individual needs is much more loose. And so people's natural tendencies came out more, right?
Mm.
And the ways that people trip over themselves and they are really harsh on themselves and they don't let their gifts shine through because of perfectionism come through like 10 times more than in one-on-one work. One-on-one work is so much easier in some sense because you can just kind of go directly in the thing, right? And like help them surgically work with it. But I think teaching, especially longer term, is much more like life, and life is so much messier than
Mm.
that. And so what I've noticed in my own work that I just love this connection that we have is what does it look like to create structures as a teacher, as a facilitator that can help people come to their own knowing about how to first understand their own instruments, second retune or repair their instruments in whatever ways feel in alignment with them. And then third, to start reclaiming and getting back in touch with a sense of courageousness. I don't have a better word for it. Courageousness to actually sing the song that they are meant to sing. And you know what, Helen? As my ego doesn't like this, right? But like sometimes there are some people who can take an 8-week experience with me and they get it. But I really believe that those people have been doing the work for a while, and I just happen to be there while the clicking happens for them, right? And I'm sure something that is in the curriculum, in the field, in my presence brought that out of them. But there are other people for whom it will just take years, and I will not get to see the fruit of that work. And this has been my challenge because I'm very impatient, and I think, to go back to what you were saying earlier about like not self-abandoning, something I am currently really facing about myself is how ambitious and how hardworking and how efficient I am as a person. And how that also comes with often a lack of self-compassion. You know, because that's how I learned I could get things done, by pushing myself. And I also then want to push other people. But people will tell you, people cannot be pushed by, you can't control people, you know? So anyways, that's what it's bringing up for me. And I am sensing this connection in this conversation with you and in this space, that the image I'm seeing, Helen, is you are kind of weaving the thread between consciousness and the part of us that can connect to that Akashic field with the heart and with the body. And maybe filling the gap that you have been perceiving through your experience facilitating this work for other people. Does that feel reflective? Yeah.
Yes. And I just wanted to say that the challenge you experience is a very similar challenge I experience, where sometimes you may not be able to see the fruits of labor. And I don't know if I'll ever resolve that in this lifetime, because there's a part of me that absolutely knows on some level this person is going to get it in their own way, you know, but it's not going to be with me.
Yes.
And so, yes, maybe that is my ego as well. You know, I don't need the credit, but I'm so inspired when I get to see it in them. It's like, oh my God, you are inspiring for me. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's such a, some students, they are ready. They've done the work and they are ready. And sometimes doing the work is hard. You know, it really requires us to look into those abandoned places inside of us. And sometimes that's really difficult, you know. It can be really, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think about that, you know, in regards to, there's one relationship that I have, and I love this person tremendously. Like, I love this person through and through. And I also have to lower my expectations of what kind of relationship we'll have, because it does not appear that this is going to be a lifetime for them to resolve what makes them, you know, unavailable to fully be present and be in the kind of relationship that I know we can have, but we can't have, you know? So then I'm just like, okay, this is the most I can expect from this relationship, and I just have to let it go.
That is so hard. So hard. And it can be so heartbreaking, I think, to our human self. Yeah. Over the years, I think I've allowed myself to really be with that part of myself that is so disappointed, you know? And almost felt cheated by life, because this is, I think, one of the price one has to pay with the gift of sight, right? That many things you see are just not going to come to fruition. You know, it's just not
So
going to
true.
happen. It's not going to happen.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. I want to talk with you about, strangely enough, or maybe not strangely enough, but what's really coming and alive for me at this moment is to talk to you about teaching, actually, because I'm not sure if I've ever told you this, Helen, but you've inspired me so much in the way that you held your classes, because there is such a trust that I perceive and an audacity in how you hold space for people to really come to their own knowing. And that is so hard because, I mean, for me, I'm just going to speak for myself personally. I have a lot of hot takes, you know, like I have a lot of opinions. This is why I have a podcast, and I somehow am able to talk weekly about what I think. And more, the more I allow myself to facilitate learning spaces, the more I am aware that in 2023, the problem that we have isn't a lack of information, but a lack of space, a lack of skill around being able to be with one's self long enough to let the inner teacher start teaching us.
Mm.
And I still remember, Helen, when I took your first class, the first class of your personal pathways class, I was so like, just like taken aback, because I was like, wow. First of all, it was so ballsy of you to just be like, here are a list of questions, and I'm going to sit here while you answer them. And you know, I come again, like just to kind of orient you in like the context I came from. I came from the astrology world, where all my teachers were just talking for 3 hours live on Zoom, and they're just like, Mars is blah blah blah, blah, Venus is blah 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 blah, and it's like, it was great. I loved it when I was learning, and also as I was stepping into facilitating, that didn't feel right to me. And something I want to kind of bring into the present moment here is, as you know, I'm currently facilitating a container called Eyes on the Edge, where we explore Mars. And, you know, some of the participants have shared with me what came through for them in meditation, in kind of self-inquiry. And I could not have come up with that, Helen. I could not. It's their own wise teacher teaching them. But that radical trust and radical vision that everybody has their own access to this really wise parts of them, I'm just like, I remember that first class, I was just floored. I was like, wow, this woman really believes that I have access to that, you know? And it was like, and to make it even more funny to me, I took the self-paced version. So I didn't even meet you in person. I was just watching a recording of you doing that. And I was like, what? So I want to talk more about this, because this is, I think, part of your work that has impacted me so deeply. And I want to hear your relationship with it. Like, how did you come to that point? Yeah. Anything that comes up for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is really cool because in your opening of our conversation today, You were talking about how I listen and just like allow, whatever to come through me to come through me.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, it struck me because it struck me so deep. Because the guidance that I have continually gotten over the years about my role, my responsibility as a teacher is to listen.
Mm.
And when there are destructive things happening on our planet and your community wants you to respond, to act, you're like, oh, I have to be available. I have to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go to my records around how I respond, and they would say, just listen, just listen. And just listening doesn't really go over well when a community wants to hear from you and wants to know that you are being present and aware of things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But my records have always been so firm and gentle around listening that I just knew I had to listen. So it struck me when you said that earlier because nobody has ever reflected that back to me.
Mm.
That has been an inner conversation between me and my records. And you just put it out there. And I was like, oh, how does Jonathan know? Oh my goodness, I feel exposed. Yes, you got me. But there's also something that you shared in, teaching and facilitating for yourself and for your students, for your community. And it was specifically around letting the inner teacher teach you. And what I have found, okay, so how this connects to listening. So in listening, I'm able to truly hear the needs that are being expressed.
Mm.
Like it's almost like I can hear deeper than what's on the surface. And in the work that I teach, when I'm guiding people through these exercises to answer these questions for themselves, when they share their experiences with me, I learn so much. So like I may be the teacher, but I'm really just a student. And when I hear participants share their experiences, I learn so much about their experience, how personal, how unique it is to them, that it gives me direction to create the work I create.
Mm-hmm.
So the body of work that I have would not be what it is if I did not allow myself to be a student. So it's so funny because it is pretty radical for me to do the work that I'm doing because that is not how our work has been taught to us in the past.
Mm.
And I'm going to say that's not how our work has been taught to us in the Akashic record field, before. Like you always learn someone else's way. You always learn their lens, their experience of what the Akasha is for them. But the truth is, my perspective, my experience is never going to be like yours because I may not have the same ontological lenses that are informing me the way you experience your Akashic records.
Yeah.
So to give someone permission to listen to that for themselves, to find the vocabulary, the language to define it, it's a really confronting position for me to be in as a teacher
Yeah.
because they want, I shouldn't say they, meaning all of them, but some students want me to define it for them and I cannot do it. So some students, for that reason, like they don't like me as a teacher, because that's not the class they signed up for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I can't change it.
Wow. Okay. I have a few thoughts here. One is on a more superficial level. I know you and I have been in conversation about, does it feel right to call it the Akashic Records, the Akashic field, the Akashic consciousness? And we're still going to put a pin on that question because the answer is yet to be found. But what I'm hearing from what you're sharing, Helen, is that it's not so much about who we're talking to, which I believe is important. But sometimes when I hear us, I'm not talking about Jonathan and Helen, I'm talking about like the community, the collective, talking about like, who are we actually talking to? There's kind of an egoic layer to it. And I don't want to shame that egoic layer because I do think it's important to know. But staying with the question of who am I talking to? What are they trying to share through me? I think is more valuable than the answers themselves. And like once I come to my answer, which may happen tomorrow or which may happen in 10 years, Helen, and I tell you, you might be like, that doesn't resonate with me. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that the value in engaging with this work is that deep listening that you so beautifully embody, I think. Because your ability to listen to the work that wants to come through you, your ability to listen to your students, the depth and the engagement of that listening wouldn't have been possible probably if you hadn't spent the time to really listen to your records or whatever they want to call themselves, right? And I want to make sure we return to that point because I have another little alley that I want to kind of go with you around that. But the other thing that was coming up for me too is, and I'm curious to hear your understanding and your experience around this, because something that my Akashic consciousness has told me about my work is that part of what I'm here to do is to help people listen to their inner teacher, because the kinds of people who come to me and my work are not people who are here to learn the techniques. They're actually here because there's work that wants to come through them and they haven't been equipped with the skills and the inner qualities necessary to be able to let that inner work teach them. And that's why it felt like constipation. That's why it can't come through, because they haven't been able to hear that inner teacher. And for some of them, it may be the case that they go to all these different teachers. I mean, I'm raising my hand here. I'm a collector of teachers. And I'm proud of it, because I do feel like part of my learning style is I see parts of myself that are perhaps still dormant reflected in my teacher. And that's how I learn how to embody that quality, because as I mentioned, in terms of how I interact with your work, seeing you hold space in that way, Helen, inspired me. And then at some point, there was a months where I was just like, wow, Helen is just so amazing. And then I start to really see beyond just admiration into, oh, what I see as amazing in Helen is actually a quality that is dormant within me that I want to cultivate for myself. And so in some sense, what I'm trying to get to is that what I've been shown is my work is to help inspire people to see whatever it is that they see within me as the reference point so that they can start doing for themselves. And the point is not for them to be around me forever, right? Like they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do later. And some of them will be with me for a long time, and some of them will be with me for 2 readings, and we're done. So that's my reflection on what you just shared. And I'm curious if that is also something that you have received about your work, that you're here to help people excavate, remember the work that has always been meant for them specifically and uniquely to put out into the world.
And so, interestingly enough, everything that you just shared speaks into this new body of work, Pathways of the Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really funny is that I created that body of work around romantic relationships. It was really just about partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. But what I started to see as I was sharing the work, oh no, this is really about whatever the heart energy wants to become. And what I had found with that work, because I have been developing it and kind of like sharing it with just, small groups of people and like, just refining it. But what I had come to discover is that there's really just these dormant aspects that are wanting to be embodied and wanting to be expressed through someone.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing is we're going into those places so that somebody can set them free. And I never expected the work to go in that direction, although it makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you think about romantic relationships, or however you want to define them, partnerships, it's really, I know people say this, it's really just a relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
And it's reflected into these people, and they're just showing you. And so romantic relationships really feel like, they are confronting in that if you know there is something inside of you that you want to see come alive, it's a really great chance that relationship and even that's, when I hear you talk about like as a teacher and having teachers, the same thing, but romantic relationships are like even more vulnerable because there's just different levels of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially those, these relationships are really just showing us these like aspects. And so what I started to see with Pathways of the Heart, it started to feel like I was doing, if you've ever heard of internal family systems,
Mm-hmm.
is that the IFS? Internal? I think it's internal.
Yeah,
Family
internal
systems.
family systems. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I only read one book on it. I've never experienced it. But the author was talking about like parts work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing it in Pathways of the Heart.
Yeah.
And it isn't, and what's so amazing about Pathways of the Heart is that we work with the etheric heart, which is kind of connected
Mm.
to something you were talking about with like, is it really called the Akashic Records, or like, do we really call it the Akashic Records? But we're working with the etheric heart, and so there, there's no like categorized parts. Like I could never say like, oh, today we're going to connect with this part. I apply the same personal pathway work to this pathways of the heart work. And so we connect with those aspects of the heart, but the person is naming them. They are identifying what those parts are. And it's incredible to see, like, what is that aspect of your heart that wants to be embodied, or what has been wounded,
Mm.
and like how can we
Mhm.
tend to it. So yeah, I've been just when I think about the word Akashic Records and how my practice has evolved now, like into this new body of work, Pathways of the Heart. And I'm saying that I'm working with the etheric heart. I've been trying to figure out like, how does this relate to the Akashic Records? And so my only sense is that when we're working with the Akasha, which is Sanskrit for ether, so when we're working with the ether or the non-physical field, Pathways of the Heart feels like it goes into this dimension in that field, and that dimension is where the etheric heart lies.
Mhm.
But what's so trippy is that inside that dimension of the etheric heart, there are so many other dimensions. Like it's almost like you go into like wormhole after wormhole after wormhole. And one other dimension that comes to mind is what I'm calling for now, because I don't know what else to call it. And I asked my guides for some help on like what to name it. We're just calling it the field of the unresolved.
Mm.
And that's where we get to really connect with pieces that probably want to come together that may not necessarily be, together.
Yeah.
So so then I'm like, I can't call this the Akashic Records anymore. It's not like
Mm. Mhm.
it's beyond that, it's the new discoveries really require new language.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. Okay. So I don't know why, but this question feels pertinent at this point. So I'm just going to ask it. So I want to share with you, Helen, my experience with doing the personal pathways work because I came into it wanting to connect to the Akashic Records, right? Like many people who probably came to your work. And I got a pathway and I was like, okay, like this pathway, let's start using it, right? And then I used it for a while. And then after some time, there came a curiosity within me around what does it look like if I start to use the personal pathways work to also connect with the planets. And not just individual planets. I think what I was really interested in, right, is for example, when we look at our birth chart, everybody has Mars, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, right? At the very least, depending on what you practice. I think it's pretty general consensus that for a lot of astrologers in the Western and Vedic tradition, those are the seven traditional planets, right? And so I was really interested in like what happens if I connect to the consciousness of the dance between these planets. And then I started talking to they call themselves the cosmic body. And then I have another invocation. And then I also create invocations for each of the planets, right? Like some of them are very short, some of them are like pretty long. And then I joined the Akashic mentorship with Leah Garza. And through Leah's work, what I was receiving was actually a pathway to my, I think you call it omnidimensional self. Is that what you call it in your work? Yeah. And it's like, so my question really is, Helen, like, it really doesn't feel to me like I'm talking to the same consciousness. Like, and the answers I get are very different. Like when I use the quote unquote traditional Akashic field, Akashic consciousness records pathway, I get a very specific kind of information. Like I get this almost like zoomed out perspective that is just so interesting because, and frankly, to be honest with you, I have found that this is trade secret, but whatever, I'm going to share it in my podcast. I usually am only able to stay in that layer with most clients who came to my reading spaces for about 15 to 20 minutes. People can't take more than that. Most people that come to my reading space can't take more than that. Beyond that, after the 15, 20 minutes, usually we start doing more energy work because I've also trained in energy work for a while and I would see things, stories, that are kind of more in the personal range. But that Akasha consciousness to me is so far out that sometimes the real work is in then spending the next 40 to 45 minutes talking about how this impacts them on a very personal level. Because I can talk about the karmic situation, whatever, but it like doesn't help. Like it just sticks here, right? Like it almost is like me raining down candies onto your roof, but you don't have a ladder and you can't pick up the candy.
Oh, I love that.
But that's been my own experience. And
True.
then when I do the cosmic body work, that one is so different because it shifted my astrology readings. Like suddenly it makes it much more visceral. Like we're not just talking about each of the planets and their kind of more astral range, but we're talking about the layer that you can't necessarily see but exists within you that are influenced by the planets, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So like when we're talking about Mars through the cosmic body perspective, it's like your energetic Mars specific to you. And then when I do this omnidimensional self work, and you can ask Leah about this, Helen, because it's so funny. I literally, like, I think I probably asked her like 10 times, like, am I hearing this right? Why does this just sound like me? And it was like so much self-doubt coming up, but it was exactly what I was supposed to be working with because I realized now that I wouldn't say I'm on the other end of that, but I'm kind of in a different place than I was, that what I was really working through is I didn't believe myself, Helen. I just didn't believe myself. So anyways, my real question here, and the reason why I shared all of this is because I want to hear your take about the different dimensions of consciousness that you've kind of tapped into and that you've also seen people tapping into in your containers, in your work.
So it made me think about a new pathway I created, which was actually there's two new pathways I created. So the first was pathway of the body's body. And that one's all about this like inner universe. But it's pretty loaded, meaning some of the lessons were a little cutthroat for me, where I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this one. So we just recently created a new one that's sort of acting as a bridge to this pathways of the body's body.
Yeah.
So what I love about that is that it's a very earth-based, embodied and grounded pathway, which is really helpful. Which actually I would say admittedly really changes the guidance system that comes along with it. Like the guidance system for me is the planet and is the living systems And it also feels like it's the intelligence of the genes, like of me as like an organism. So it's a really unique one.
Mhm.
The pathway that I use primarily, I would say also very similar to you, is working more with this omnidimensional self.
Mm.
And the reason I can tell is because of the groups of energy that I am invoking and acknowledging, and what I'm asking to be connected with, and like kind of like where I want that information. And so, my languaging around it is like this, I say the source of the Akashic Records.
Mm.
And then I just say guiding forces and supportive beings. Like, so I like leave it really vague. I'm like, whoever wants to pop in, like you can pop in. And there's some conditions. So it's not just anything that can be there.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely some parameters that I've created around who and what kind of like steps into those roles that I created.
Yeah.
But what I've found is working with that pathway, as opposed to Linda House, my former teacher, the guidance that comes through for me is different. Like it just feels like more true of me. And I don't really
Mm.
know how else to define that other than
Mm-hmm.
like it it's just more me,
Yeah.
and and because that guidance feels like it's allowing these aspects of that omnidimensional self to kind of come into my awareness, I've started to really question, well, like, I'm thinking of the Wizard of Oz. It's like who's behind the curtain? Like who's really talking here?
Mm-hmm.
And what's pretty incredible, and I think I'm going to speak for myself, I was raised Catholic, and there's a hierarchy, and God God's at the top, and maybe Jesus, his son, is like, I don't know, second in command or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it never really resonated with me. Like I was like, I can get down with like a collective God, but I'm not really too sure, that that's the entity here. Um, so what I have found, and this is, talk about audacity, like in the most recent class one that I taught live, most recent meaning this past spring,
Mm-hmm.
I started to share some of my views based on my experience of working with the omnidimensional self. And essentially, what I had said was, I've come to discover that you are God. It's like, it's you. That omnidimensional self, that's you. It's so funny. And like one of my students like believes in God,
Mm-hmm.
believes in the hierarchy. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
presenting some pretty challenging perspective beliefs for them, like that do not did not congeal with like their belief system. And so
Mm-hmm.
this person was pretty turned off by me. So it's okay. It's like I understand like what I'm proposing. Like if collectively through our different cultures, our different countries, like we have been indoctrinated into these sort of superior entities, um, how
Mm-hmm.
how could we even fathom that
Yeah.
those superior entities are actually just, like an etheric embodiment of us? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's ludicrous for me to propose. But the reason I can say that is because the way my omnidimensional self talks to me is not how a superior entity would talk to me. It talks to me like I would talk to myself,
Mm-hmm.
but that, it just has access to a lot more things that that like my conscious self cannot hold at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me know if you have any thoughts on that, but it's sort of what comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. I felt emotional hearing you say that because I just had this experience this morning of accessing my omnidimensional self, and literally what I've been adding to this practice is a practice of humbly opening and listening to what they wanted to share with me. Because sometimes, I do my practice in the morning and I have a gazillion things I have to do afterwards, right? I'm always like running around. I'm like half listening, kind of like how I would listen to like an audiobook or something like that. And this morning I was really listening. And what they told me was to look around. And I was like, what? They were like, look around. And I started looking at the different objects in my apartment, Helen. And they said, this is what you brought into your field. They were like, look at this life that you've created. They're like, you didn't do this alone. Make no mistake. There were others involved, but you did this. And it was so profound for me to even just like experience real gratitude and reverence in that moment, right? Because how often do we go out and say, I want a hotter partner. I want more money, And it's like, I think all of that is so valid. I think desire is such an intelligent part of our human experience. And also, can we honor and revere where we're currently at while also honoring the desires,
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's what came up as you were saying that, because that feels like, wow, yeah, it's like look at your life is essentially, I think, what they're always saying. Like, look at your life, like really.
It makes me think of something the record said. I had to get some guidance around a client, and they they essentially said the records don't do you, you do the records. And they reminded me what the Akashic Records are: a vibrational record of a soul and its journey.
Mm-hmm.
Journey does not mean destination. A
Mm-hmm.
journey is like from one place to another. Vibrational means that it is energy. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we have these experiences that don't come to fruition on the earth plane, my records always guide me back to what the records are and what they are not, and are always moving us into a place of empowerment around exactly what you just shared.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you chose this. Everything
Mm-hmm.
in this house is so deliberate and thoughtful.
Yeah.
You brought this in.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible.
Yeah. It really is. Mhm. Wow. I'm not sure if I have any other questions, Helen. That feels like such a beautiful landing place. But I'm curious if there's anything I haven't asked that you want to share or explore at this moment.
Well, I would say just like in closing, I would love to know, in your experience right now with your container, just sort of given what I shared earlier about how, the people that we share with and that we teach, um, are really, it's such an opportunity to listen. And so I'm just
Hmm.
curious about you and um, and what you've been taking away from your experience so far. Like,
Hmm.
I almost feel like I really want to honor the like being present and the presence of like where you are. But I also am like, what's coming next, Jonathan?
um, I'll share this with you. So this container, the creation of it, the facilitating of it has been so confronting to me on so many different levels. Primarily because what I continue to be guided towards is understanding that my role, the most sacred thing I can do is to take responsibility in listening to what wants to come through me.
Mm,
I have probably alluded to this throughout the conversation, but I think I am the kind of person who really benefits from feedback, from conversation, from seeing a piece of myself, but maybe I think more accurately the universe reflected in another person. But this container has been teaching me that actually what will be the most helpful for everyone involved is for me to really listen deeply to the guidance that wants to come through me. And not even worry about like what are people working on? Can I serve them better? Like this is just always where my mind goes. And they tell me, like my guides, Mars, tell me that that's that's a skill you already know how to do. We don't need to continue
mm,
beating on that, you know? This at this point you're really here to like listen what wants to come through and then let that be that, and then people will take what they need to take out of it at their own time, in their own ways, and to trust that me as a vessel is as valuable as me hmm, being that good friend to people, in a sense that like trying to listen to them and trying to custom design the experience that I perceive will help them the most. Because it's almost like when I do that, the energy is split, and then I end up doing neither. I'm not really listening, I'm not really helping them. So they're saying
mm,
to me that I'm just in this moment now of learning how to listen and learning how to transmit. And if people have questions, they'll come to me. I've cultivated what I needed to cultivate to be open to listening, to be open to receiving feedback, to be open to tweaking. But where I'm most guided to right now is just to really listen to what wants to come through and to trust. It's so funny because I wanted to say not worry about what other people think, but that's not it. It's more about to trust that whoever's supposed to benefit from the work that is wanting to come through me will benefit from it, and they'll find this work, right? Yeah, that's where
wow,
I'm at.
I
Thank you for
love that.
asking.
You are so welcome. It's so affirming. That is the guidance I always get. I love it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
really feel like, oh boy, we are just a mirror. It's
I love
amazing.
this so much, Helen. Thank you for spending the time and for your energy and your full presence. I just really appreciate this conversation with you. And I think in closing, I just want to ask you how you would prefer people to find you and your work.
Hmm. I would say the best place is my website. So it's helenvonderheide.com. It is under construction.
Mm,
Like I would say for about 3 years now, we've really been trying to figure out what the story is of Helen Vonderheide and this website. So it is the best place to find me. It has the most current and up to date information about everything. My Instagram is Helen Vonderheide as well, but I would say my website is probably the place where you could truly learn a little bit more and hear what the story is so far.
hmm. Awesome. Thank you. I just so appreciate
Thank
you and
you,
this conversation. Yeah.
Jonathan. It has just been such a gift to be with you, and thank you so much for inviting me on. I feel like, God, it's one thing to truly enjoy the conversations that we have,
Hmm.
but it's definitely another to share this on your podcast and
Yeah.
with all the people that are connected to you. So thank you.
Hmm. Thank you, Helen.
You're welcome.